In the meantime, I guess it's time to introduce the players. Down south is Vortix playing as the French, in blue. Up north is DauT playing as the Red Abbasids. And of course, because this set started a couple of minutes ago, we're still catching up. I'm caught up myself,
Yep,
so
I'm good to
we're
go as
all
well.
good.
Yep, 2 minutes in. So you didn't miss anything too important. We got past the boring part, folks. We knew this was going to work. Everyone likes gold. DauT likes berries. The French like knights, but we're not that quick. We're only 2 minutes in. Give it a few minutes, folks. We'll be there quickly. But now this should be an interesting one because, well, we earlier today saw Delhi versus England, a matchup that used to be quite one-sided on these open maps. And I feel like this is another one of those type of matchups that's very deceitful. Like, traditionally, if you talk historically when the game first came out, you'd probably just say France has this. I mean, definitely back then when knights were even more powerful. But this time around, with the boost to the early eco for the Abbasids, and the power of the spearmen, not to mention the potential for camel unease in compositions, as we just recently saw in a series we just watched, I have to say that I wouldn't just write Abbasids off, even on open maps like this anymore, against cavalry-based civs.
All right, looking at the Vortix, he's coming in with the School of Cavalry, whereas up north, as we said, DauT is handling the Abbasids. This is a civilization that DauT has been using very extensively in tournaments before as well, even before they were buffed, and usually it ended up being in quite utter failures. So I'm curious to see how he's going to change up his approach, because really, DauT was really the guy that just went on so resiliently to that Abbasid pick on open maps, and oftentimes it failed. Curious to see that after the buff, with a bit of a change in strategy potentially, how he's going to be able to utilize that.
I recall casting many, especially High View. He seemed to be obsessed at one stage with High View as the Abbasid map, and every time was proved wrong, as he would just pin himself in the corner and not be able to do anything. But yeah, this is a new dawning of Abbasids. Like, their eco timing is so much quicker, their tech up timings are so much quicker. It's a more present Civ. Like, you know, I think back to your 3v3 tournament, like Abbasids, I talked to them as the cannon fodder for a long time, right? Because everything was too slow, they just built crap units and they filled the gap in the team comp like that. But that strategy doesn't work very well in 1v1s. 1v1s really require that kind of emphatic unit that's going to end the game, and spearmen massing, you know, with a few archers wouldn't really do that for the Abbasids, despite the fact they could build rams early. It wasn't good enough. But all of a sudden, we're talking about a Civ that techs up maybe 2 minutes quicker at least, gets access to the creeping siege, as I like to refer to it, where you're able to build up the mangonels in the field, and all of a sudden you have a much more lethal dynasty coming out of the Middle East.
Absolutely. And as I said, the big thing here is that the age up was also made shorter, and this is something that's very underappreciated. One of the problems that the Abbasids had is that it takes so much time for them to get to feudal age that many civilizations that can just rush a feudal, like the French, for example, will just have powerful military units on the battlefield by the time you get to feudal. And by reducing that age up timing, it's a little easier for DauT to just catch up and make sure that he also has some relevant units on the battlefield by the time the enemies arrive.
It kind of painted the picture perfectly when we saw DauT tech up ahead of Vortix, who's playing on the French, right? Like that kind of really kind of nailed it home for people, like how powerful this is. Also, just if you wanted to know how good the berry bush gather rate is, just have a look at the fact that DauT has already depleted 2 of these berry bushes. So quick.
And those berry bushes gather 500 food as well, so it's not just 250 by default. The Abbasids also get those little fences around them, making them have 500 food on them. So that is already 1,000 food gathered, and some other bushes are also already being depleted.
It's pretty absurd. I personally don't understand how putting a pretty little fence around a berry bush makes it more bountiful to this degree. But you know, I'm not an expert farmer, so I can't speak to the merits of it. Meanwhile, when we look in the south, though, Vortix, what he did already do is drop the archery range. I think he scouted out, because DauT done this at the foot of his base, he saw the rack straight away, so he understood what he needed. Now, this does mean that France is going to be playing into that El Clasico combo, me get knight, me get archer, pew pew, and clash of swords. It does inherently put DauT at a disadvantage. The question is whether he'll be able to just cruise through and look for a later timing, or if he actually pivots into those camel archers that we've already seen used once today.
That could definitely be an option, because, as you said, the French will guarantee to be rely on the knight play that they have, and they will support that with archers. But the moment you have some camels appearing on the battlefield, not as the primary unit, but as an auxiliary unit, you can have something that reduces the combat efficiency of those knights quite a bit. And that's quite powerful, as we got one knight moving in to try and get a villager kill. That is going to be a sword swung and a villager going down.
And I don't think he got, he didn't get the charge out, so he's still got the lance to work with. He could cycle in for another one, but the Spearman would deter him for the moment. You can just see how powerful Spears are these days. Just so much damage already done to one Raw Knight. But he's going to sneak it. And DauT's not looking. Oh, he goes in. One hit. Two should run out the other side, and this time won't take any damage from the Spears. This is getting frustrating. So remember that the French do build these villages slightly quicker. So this is already escalating. It's already a 4-villager lead due to the combination of those snipes and the fact that Vortix is building villages just that little bit quicker. At this stage in the game, 17 seconds for every villager to produce.
And the painful thing is that it's not even the fact that you can retaliate for those villagers lost. It's not like that knight is forever going to be damaged. You can just heal it up with Chivalry, an upgrade that Vortix currently is lacking, but he will be able to grab it at some point. Looks like DauT is moving out with his forces now, though. And with the Abbasids being able to build siege weapons right at the beginning without the upgrade, this could give a nice power spike for DauT to potentially push the base of Vortix, but he needs to be 100% sure that he's got the numbers to do it, because Rams are a nice thing, but if you can't protect them, they're useless.
Yeah, and you don't want to trickle in troops. Whenever we see these cavalry-infantry matchups, if you don't have a bulk of infantry big enough to just take a fight outright on their own, and you're waiting around for reinforcements to arrive, the strategy we've seen a lot of these cavalry-based civs employ is to just snipe out the reinforcements, pick them off one by one, even if it's spearmen. If you have 4 knights riding into 1 spearman, I don't know if you guys are great mathematicians, but me, being an astute mathematician of managing to do an 8-year-old's homework, can tell you that 1 spear doesn't do very well against 4 horses, even if they line up.
That is indeed the case. Now we got some archer support as well for Vortix, and the army value is much larger here for Vortix, looking to take a fight in the middle.
Yeah, archers trying to poke and prod. Archers are going to be revealed, though. Moving in by the knights there. Vortix cleans up a few, backs away. Archers still being picked off, as DauT has to prioritize these archers from the French player. The important part is that he gets these knights away after picking off a decent chunk of the archer battalion from DauT, though. Will fully retreat. And of course, these are all lightly armored units. So the difference, this is the other stupid part, right, about like the knight spam in the early game that has always been an issue, is if you lost that fight there, Vortix dives your base and kills off villagers. You win this fight, unless you're going to sit here and build battering rams, you can't do anything off the back of it to like easily punish into Vortix base.
And Vortix's gold mine is quite open over here, so the moment you can push him off from that gold, Vortix could be in trouble, but that's the reason why he's charging him once again, and this time around he's got the archers to take out down those spears. Now the knight's jumping on all those archers.
Yeah, but he backed off. He revealed his archers. So this trade is now going to be good for Vortix. He gets around the back to make sure there's no retreat. DauT, now completely invested, is going to sink his entire army. And I don't feel like he got a good trade in the end. It started off well with that mid-fight, but now the return fight working out in favor of Vortix as he keeps 6 knights up and 5 archers to back them up.
I don't think he lost a single knight over here, and that is just an absolute heartbreaker for DauT. His army has the lack of mobility here, and that is something that's haunting him quite badly. He wasn't able to reinforce that army in time, and after losing the spearman, it was just an absolute massacre. DauT now adding a stable, but from this point on, he's on the back foot. There's already a 4 villagers lead, as you said, for Vortix. And behind this one, Vortix can just heal up those knights as he's grabbing Chivalry.
And this isn't a secondary TC play out of DauT as well. So he's continuing to fall behind on the eco side. It's now a 5 villager lead for Vortix, and it's not going to change anytime soon because DauT, now that he's actually invested in a third military building, he can't afford to go back to expand his economy. He's going to be forced and pressured to replace his army at double the rate, and he might lose them doubly fast if he's not careful with the positioning of these units.
And behind this one, Vortix is able to expand as well. So the moment that he is the one being the aggressor, he's able to move out for all the hunts on the left side. And behind this one, let's not forget that DauT is depleting those berries at a quite rapid pace. And without map control, he's going to struggle to maintain that level of food economy.
Yeah, this is one of those e-boner moments, right? Because Vortix is just very, very happy. You know, he's picked France against Abbasids. Abbasids have gone into spears and archers. You're playing on Dry Arabia. He's ticking a bunch of boxes. And the end goal of getting enough ticks in those boxes is to unlock the option of playing very greedy of your economy, which is the wet dream of France. And that's exactly what he's doing. It's exactly what he won't be punished for anytime soon. Because DauT, even with him going to the stable now, he's going to need these horsemen in the main fight because his archer count is lacking. You know, you can already see that Vortix is up to 11. And DauT, I think he's only now matching it again. But the problem is those knights are still such a lethal factor that you need that kind of 5, 6, maybe even 7 archer buffer at this point, just so you have enough mass to deal with your opponent's archers while you're being picked apart by knights.
DauT is massing a huge force over here, and at this point, he's preparing for a timing push. The question is, will Vortix have enough to hold it off? I feel like we're getting close to a stage where one decisive battle will decide the outcome of this game, because this push either works for DauT and he wipes out Vortix, or this push is going to stall out, he loses his forces, and then it's game over because he's not going to have the chance to build up an army ever again.
Is it me, or does it feel like DauT was forced into too many awkward trades for him to find this timing now, though? Because I feel like if you look at the health of Vortix Knights, you talked about how none of them died before, and they were all limping away at no HP. Now look at them. This is where Chivalry really pays for itself. It's not this whole idea of cycling in and healing like 10 damage between like regular raids. It's the fact that when you take a good fight and your opponent refuses to like double down for a minute plus, that's when you start to find the value out of Chivalry. And that's exactly what's happened here. It means that Vortix at this rate, when they do finally fight, all of his Knights are going to be almost full health. And that is concerning because he already almost has 10 Knights online, and you have a lot of archers that are easily exposed to this.
And the thing is that it's going to be difficult for DauT to reinforce this army. I just don't think that he's got the beef here to take this fight. The numbers are rather close, but it's much easier for Vortix to reinforce this battle. He's got the Town Center to potentially to support. He's got defensive towers on key resources. So it's going to be very difficult for DauT to take an advantageous fight over here.
And there's a troublesome situation. DauT being forced to engage here. Spears revealing on the front. Horsemen trying to move towards the archers, not able to reach them. Now the Knights, they're going to go for the trade, and they're going to trade quicker. There's not enough horsemen here. The Spears can't assist either, and Vortix is just going to run him through. DauT is definitely going to lose the army. There's no doubt in my mind. As there's barely any Spears left, horsemen are all but picked apart, and it looks like the trades are just getting better and better as this time after the fight, Vortix is going to keep a healthy number of Knights and archers alive. And DauT, that's the entire army depleted.
That's the entire army gone, indeed. And Vortix didn't even care about those archers being harassed by the horsemen at this point, because while the horsemen are powerful against archers, when you also got knights in the party, and when just the quality of the army is so much greater for Vortix, there is no way that those horsemen will become influential. And as I said, DauT is going to try to rebuild this army, but it's going to be difficult from this point on, because if you look at Vortix, he's ready to go into Castle Age, and he still is yet to lose a knight, I do believe. Maybe he have lost 1 or 2 in that battle, but
he lost...
I honestly didn't see it.
I think it's 2 or 3 in the end, because he was up to about 10. He's down to 7 again. But yeah, it just doesn't matter. It's relevant in comparison to what DauT is losing these fights. And the impressive part is you have to keep in mind, he's taking these fights so favorably with the Knights, and they're not even charging. Right? They ran in, and they were too close to get the charge out, which means they're not even getting the bonus damage. This isn't even Vortix at maximum DPS, and yet he's still taking decisive fights. And DauT, it might not look like it to someone watching from afar who just tuned in. He really is on the ropes right now. I think if you make one more mistake in a fight like that, you're dead, because this time will be in your base. You can see the Vortix is starting to take that mid ground, and because it's Knights that are making up a decent chunk of his composition, off the back of taking a win and fight, he will gain a lot of ground and a lot of access to raid you. And what we said about DauT's composition is it doesn't offer the same. These are lightly armored units. The only way he's ever getting in afterwards is battering rams, and those are very pricey for your economy at this stage in the game as the Abbasids when you're playing on 1TC.
And Vortix just has a very, very safe economy. You see that there's defensive tower on that hunt. He's just playing this one super safe. So it's very, very difficult for DauT to find an angle to attack and find an angle where he can potentially do some damage to compensate for this.
God.
So despite the fact that DauT, I think, only lost 1 or 2 villagers, because he isn't able to kill anything from the French, there's already a 10 villagers lead for the French player, thanks to that faster villager production. Guildhall is in for Vortix. And for DauT, he is still just light years away from Castle Age. He's gonna get a ram going. He's gonna try to make a Castle Age push happen here, or excuse me, a Feudal Age push happen here with rams. But now, with Castle Age in for Vortix, he can go for Mangonels, or he can go for Men-at-Arms, which would counter everything that DauT has.
You know what? I gotta say, this ram rush timing is actually very good, Lidakor, if you just squint your eyes hard enough that the clock looks like it says 5 minutes 25. Oh, wait, no, I've unsquinted my eyes. It's 15 now. Not so good on the battering ram timer now. That's a little bit more troublesome. And I don't think one battering ram is going to do the business this time around either. And it's buying enough time. Look, the upgrades are going to come through soon. Like, how long are we out? Yep. 40 seconds, and then the archers are juiced up. And then these spearmen, well, if they didn't look naked now, they're going to feel more naked.
And the archers have a very nice position to hold behind that tower. Veteran archer upgrade not in just yet, but the knights do have the veterancy upgrade. Tower is under attack by that ram, but as the spearmen are getting picked off, the knights will have a window to jump on those archers. All the villagers get away from that tower. So really, DauT is going to take down 1 tower for the entire army that he has committed to this.
But, in fairness, that outpost looks like it was made of... No, wait, no. It looks like it's made of the same amount of wood, but it costs a third of the cost. Right, yeah, this is looking pretty bad for DauT right now. And I think it's about to get worse. The army is almost depleted. It's been picked apart by the archers. The archers are now vetted up, and that means they are going to poke you pretty damn hard, and you can't easily retreat. I don't know how they fire like this. I know, people asking questions. It looks like they surf as they fire their arrows, But you know what? The only thing that's happening surf-wise is Vortix surfing towards a victory. As DauT going to be forced to take this fight, and it will not end well for him. He hasn't got Horsemen to counter out the archers. His archer count is not favorable. The Knights can easily just juke and jive and bait the spears into bad engagements. And DauT, after he loses the army and loses the ram, you have to question where he goes from here, and the answer might just be game number 2.
And it's likely going to be game number 2 at this point, because all of those units are getting absolutely slaughtered. The KD is just massively in the favor of Vortix, and DauT taps out, and with that, Vortix takes a very dominant win over here. DauT tried the Abbasid play, but once again, you just get the feel that the Abbasids are such an underwhelming civilization in these open map scenarios, unless you have something special up your sleeve. And really, the French don't need to do anything special here other than making sure they don't die to that infantry flood. If you just look at all the power spikes that DauT had with all those armies, he had the numbers, but just the army value is much greater for the French here. Vortix with 97 kills, only 38 deaths over here, most of those being archers, barely losing a single knight in this game.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about, because I think one of the big things to look at in this game is what DauT should have been doing versus what he was doing and why, right? So a lot of people are probably sitting here, they've got, you know how it is, like the 10,000 elo rating, like armchair critics, they're fantastic sometimes. They'll sip their tea, they've got the monocle on, they're going, well, DauT should have just sniped out the pocket ecos of Vortix the way he was being greedy. And I agree, that is a pretty good play against France's greed. However, you're on an open map, and you're playing with a static force, and if at any stage Vortix sees you go for his pocket ecos, he might just go straight for your base. And then it's a better trade, because you know he's going to die with those knights. And I think that's the troublesome part about this. The fact that he chose Abbasids and it was against France on an open field map put him at an inherent disadvantage. I think from that point on, DauT's choice to try and play hard into this early game aggression with no like clear foresight in what the next step was felt to me like a misstep. I think he could have easily protected himself early on and looked for a secondary TC, being greedy himself. Yes, you are up against high pressure from France, but it feels like you're jack of all trading your Civ and not playing towards its strengths, while Vortix is just playing cut and dry, like simple France that we've known for 2 months now. And it's all too simple for him to pick you apart. I think that's the highlightable difference. DauT just seems to really be... He's not finding his groove, you know what I mean? Like you mentioned it. When we see him play Abbasids, it's not looked impressive. And this is definitely this is starting to feel like the meta where Abbasids can be impressive. And I don't know if it's because he's still playing kind of a more old style of Abbasids, or if it's like the build-up of bad losses, right? Because I think that's something to kind of highlight is it can be very easy when you get your ass whooped in a certain way, like 100 times, to just think X doesn't work, Y works, right? But obviously, that's not the way that the games work. As patches are released and new things are added and things change, things that previously failed, like tripped you up in your face, might be remarkable, as we saw with camels earlier today, right? In previous patches, that wouldn't have been the case. So you have to revisit and re-risk on these situations. I think it can be a big negative factor if you've already got a lot of experience with a Civ, because you need to look at it with fresh eyes when you come into big changes in the way that it functions.
I 100% agree with that. The thing is that Abbasids is a civilization that can work against French, but it's a pretty difficult thing to pull off. We talked about this. I think many people still underappreciate the effect of the camel aura that would debuff those knights. But even if you have that, it's a little difficult to play this matchup, because especially early on, you have to keep those camels alive. So you really need to make sure that every single move you make is perfect. Because if you make one mistake, you lose that camel, you once again don't have the debuff and you're going to struggle. And the beautiful thing about the French is that this is just such an easy civilization to play. I've spoken to Mista some time ago, and he said something very clever about French. He said that it's a civilization where you get all your bonuses just by playing standard. You don't even have to notice those bonuses, like the faster training villagers, the cheaper drop-off sites, the knight getting the attack boost after a charge. Yeah, like... You don't need to do anything special, and you can still use all your bonuses. Whereas for most other civilizations, you need to really focus on certain elements of the game in order to be able to leverage those bonuses.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crazy part that people always thought about France since its inception, like since game release, right? Is like you kind of look at how this Civ came out, and you're like, what? Why? What? Like, it's got this, and you can actually, like, if you think from a development standpoint, you can understand how a lot of this came to bear, is that it's subtle increases, subtle buffs, right? And on their own, they don't seem ridiculous. It's not like you've randomly gone, the French now have an elephant, and it will siege, an animation cancel, and have people firing arrows from on top. Right, that is like, obviously, they added that for Delhi. They're like, straight like, That looks pretty powerful. We're going to have to balance that very carefully. But all these small tweaks to French, they're not, they don't scream at you straight away, right? It's like you're adding one armor to a unit here and there. And eventually, by the time you finished adding it all up, you go, wait, this unit actually has 10 armor now. That's pretty broken. But you don't see it from like a stood back perspective. You need to actually be exposed to it. And I think that's something that's still going to have to be adjusted over time with France. I don't think it's going to necessarily be nerfed anytime soon, just because I think there's bigger issues around the balance of the game right now. Delhi. But it's definitely something I think they're going to have to look at as time goes on, because the economical benefits, like as a fantastic point you highlighted, it's just passively accessed. You don't really have to go out of your way to achieve what's so good about France.
Exactly. This being said, we're moving to the home map of Lord DauT, which is Lipany. So another open map here, which is a little concerning for yourself over here. Now down one game, he's going to have French picked, and it's going to be against the English of the Vortix. And when we started this day, you specifically said that on Lipany, a civilization like English is a little more legitimate than it is on other open maps like Dry Arabia or Highview, because while Lipany technically classifies as an open map, you got those cliffs blocking certain portions of the map, so there is way less open areas to work with, especially around the middle part of the map.
Yeah, this map specifically is really kind of weird for this matchup. Like, it's France versus England, right, on Lipany. And the thing I've noticed is whoever gets, like, if you're the English player, if you get the cliffs close to you, you are, like, it's like a 20% additional win chance. Like, it's a ridiculous buff to your chances to take a game, just because all of a sudden, France can't weave in and out your economy and, like, manipulate you and drag you left or right. You're just forced into choke points. And there's one thing that French don't want to do, against England especially, is be forced into choke points. Not only because the Lombos that have more range than your archers, and also spears that can hold choke points easily, it also means that you can actually be very efficient with your outposts, right? And get that attack speed buff at all times. The last thing that a French player wants is to be forced into a predictable avenue. And that's why, if you think back to previous patches, if we were to talk about Dry Arabia as an opening map in all these tournaments, what was easily, almost every single patch, the most popular civ for Dry Arabia? It was France, right? Because of exactly that, because they want that open ground to manipulate. And Lipany is sometimes I feel like a coin flip when you generate the map. Sometimes it is basically just Dry Arabia with a few stealth forests, but other times it's an absurd kind of weird warping of hill and dale.
We have only 1 minute left until game number 2. So who do you think is going to take this one? DauT has the French now in his hands, but we've seen Vortix play with a little more confidence. Do you think that Vortix is just going to be able to close this out 2-0?
I think Vortix is a very powerful England player. I think on previous patches, he's looked very phenomenal in this Civ. It's a very much a sleeper pick for him as well. I think until recently, a lot of people didn't clock just how good he was at playing England, because a lot more people were focused on what Vortix would do with the Mongols or what Vortix would do with the Chinese, especially when you talk about these qualifiers, these tournaments where you're talking about these best of threes. Those are the top two Civs you were worried about, especially when you consider that I'd say the last 3 major patches, it felt like England were quite underwhelming. Despite having a high pick rate, they weren't finding the same success as similar pick rate civs. But now with the change of the way early game functions, with a lot more wall presence and some subtle changes to things like animation cancelling, I feel like England has definitely risen up in the rankings. And it'll be interesting to see if Vortix is able to utilize those choke points and those wallings we talked about to force DauT into a very uncomfortable situation as a dynamic civ. Oh, look at that. My rambling lined up perfectly. We were in game. Game number 2 between Vortix and DauT. Now, of course, Vortix did take that first game pretty swiftly with the French, but this time he's going to get a sense of irony as he's going to have to face up against them himself as a static civ. Although I would say a stronger static civ in the early game compared to the Abbasids as he is playing England.
Looking at the map, though, this is one of those more open generations of Lipany. We have a limited amount of cliffs, all of them on the north, and if you look at the map, it really just feels like it is just much more open than what you would normally see for Lipany. The only good thing here for DauT is that his base looks absolutely spectacular from the perspective of wallability. The 2 forests up front make it very easy to wall off the front side. On the left side, same thing. And against the longbows, just a couple of walls could be immensely helpful because the longbows themselves struggle breaking through that. And that's basically where you want to get with the French here. You want to make sure that your opponent is bumping into walls when he's attacking you, so he can use your mobility to just try and raid. Because This is usually what this matchup comes down to. Can the French player use the mobility to outrun the opponent and just raid, as compared to having forced to be the defendant against a longbow spearman push?
Yeah, so the way like to look at this from Vortix perspective is this is kind of like the worst case scenario, really. So you know when you're like editing things in Photoshop or other things, you have like layers type stuff. This is one of those situations where you want to just be able to select all 4 of these forest bunches you see that are near Vortix's base, and then drag them to the right. And then you're smiling. Then you're very happy. Maybe rotate a bit as well, but you basically want these choke points. This is what I was looking for. Basically, if you flip these 2 starting location, I'd increase Vortix's chance of winning this by like 20% off the back of that, because he can just wall himself in. Now he's very exposed, and this is a perfect situation for DauT, because like you said, it's not only easy for him to wall up, but why would you wall up as France? Well, because against England, if they do somehow have you on the back foot, the biggest weakness is that they move like old men with Zimmer frames. They are not fast. So if you look right next to DauT's base, he's got this tiny little opening. If he puts a tiny wall there, your Lombo have to run so far to get from one side of the base to the other that it's going to give so much time for DauT to feel comfortable, and you won't be able to keep that high pressure that you need to if you want to Lombo rush as England.
And let's keep in mind that in early game, the economy of the French will be more powerful than the English economy. Of course, once you got the English farming kick in, it's going to swing in the favor of the English. But for DauT, a fairly defensive game is also something that he would be happy with. And technically, he can even wall to the cliff using this forest. So he could pretty much just wall his entire base as if this was Hillandale.
Yeah, I'd actually like to see like a kind of staging point for Vortix on this hill to the north, right, where the sacred site is. That's actually a nice kind of choke point for you to establish like a point to push in from. Maybe try to aggressively wall yourself to box your opponent in, dictate the flow. Because I think that's actually one way you can still manipulate the base of your opponent to your advantage. The problem with England is that it's become so min-max. It's become so kind of like narrow vision that I don't see many players bringing up more than 1 villager for the purpose of dropping an outpost early on, right? So the whole argument of begging them essentially to run up with 2 or 3 villages and wall their opponents in just doesn't seem feasible, especially considering how expensive England's early game economy is for wood. So I feel like Vortix is very much in a predictable motion for the first 20 minutes. And if he can survive the onslaught of DauT, we maybe have an interesting game, because it has to be said that if we look at the statistics in high-level games, England, I believe, is I'm going to use an American word that I don't know why it exists, the winningest civ in hyper late game situations.
Absolutely. Like, in hyper late game situations, that farming power is just so powerful, not only in terms of food eco, but also the gold eco. Really, it's one of the most population efficient economies, as we got Vortix with a bit of a harassment over here by the scout. Not a ton of damage done, but even just forcing one villager back to the town center, having to pull another one to get to the gold mine, is a bit of an efficiency decrease here for DauT. And in such tournaments, you grab every single bit of an advantage that you can have, as we do have that scout continuing to just harass those villagers as much as possible.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, he can do it for free. Like, usually the argument is, I'm doing this, so I'm actually not getting scout vision. It was actually meant, like, with the new pro scouts, is one of the big weaknesses of pro scouts, right? Is like it takes double the time to gather carcasses, which means you're playing blind a lot. In this situation, you don't care about playing blind at this stage of the game, because everything that DauT wants to do is very predictable. France doesn't have this weird curveball in this opener against England. They're going to just try to get up into the feudal. They're going to try to push out a few knights. There's not going to be any cheesy plays off the back of outpost rushing or anything. So these scouts aren't really losing value by just sitting here in the gold vein, not giving you vision of what's happening elsewhere. Tech up's more or less mirrored. There's going to be an archer range being dropped straight away by DauT. We won't see any of those barrack shenanigans, of course, because you know that your English opponent is just going to be playing hard into range longbowmen. So it really should just be archers and then the knights. Archers, of course, wonderful against longbos, because remember, if you ever force the longbos to run away, they move very slow. And the archers are quick enough to chase down and do their weird surfing animations. They fire away at you like a Marvel hero.
Especially when you have knights supporting them. In general, that extra mobility for DauT could be very helpful. Now for Vortix, he's going to spot the archer range, and in general, he's got a very good scouting of DauT's base. So he's aware of the location of the gold mine, he's aware of the location of that archer range, and as things stand, he's just going for spears and archers, as you would expect. But as we've discussed this multiple times with the English, you gotta be very considerate of how you move out with your forces, because one bad fight and you are done.
Yeah, this is why I was talking about that dream scenario being that he was in the south here, because he could have easily walled himself in a bit and then went very aggressive with his force. He could have went wide. In this situation, I feel like if Vortix ever goes wide on the flanks or is forced to go wide because of walling, he's going to leave himself in a very exposed situation where DauT can just run past and go straight towards his base. It's the nightmare situation for England. It's the exact same thing that made DauT lose game 1 on that open map. It's just, if you're ever forced to go on the flanks and you need to go on the flanks, your opponent has a